Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shane Hamster. I'll be your technical host for today's meeting. As we get about to get started, I just want to go over the housekeeping items one last time. Over on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a question and answer pod. That's where you can enter your questions, comments, and feedback, either pertaining to the presentation or if you need some technical assistance, I will respond to you there. In the middle of your screen is where you'll see the presentation today. And over your computer speakers or on the phone line, you'll be hearing the audio. To begin today, I'd like to hand it over to our event organizer to do introductions.
Good afternoon. Let's go ahead and begin our webinar. Welcome to the webinar today on Writing Effective Proposals, Tips for a Strong Application, facilitated by the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center, which consists of our team at RTI International. I'm Sari Schumann with the Resource Center team, and I will be moderating our webinar this afternoon. The purpose of these webinars is to provide helpful, current, and applicable information for ADSSP and ADI-SSS grant projects and others in the aging presentation to be sent. We'll allow time for questions through the webinar chat feature at the conclusion of the presentation. If you have a question during or after the presentation, please enter your questions into the chat feature of the webinar. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Erin Long from the Administration on Aging, Administration for Community Living, to provide a brief welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to attend the webinar. We are very excited to present this webinar with Dr. Wiener to assist those who would be interested in applying to our funding opportunity announcements to enhance the content of their applications and provide pointers that may be of assistance to them. So with that, I'll turn it right over to Dr. Wiener to begin his presentation. And again, thank you. If you have any questions, please do connect with me.
Good afternoon. So I've been spending the last 32 years of my career working for soft money organizations, organizations that depend on grants and contracts to get their money. And so I've been involved with many proposals, more than I probably would like to admit. And what I'd like to do today is share some of the things that I've learned about writing effective proposals, with focusing on proposals going to the Administration for Community Living. But what I have to say will have general applicability for foundations, other government agencies, and other places where you might be seeking funds. So the goal of this presentation is really to get you to write excellent proposals. Excellent proposals are important because they're the key to obtaining the financial resources that you want. The agency, the foundation, the other source has money, and you need that money to do the kinds of things that you want to do, to expand the reach of your organization, to move into new kinds of areas. Excellent proposals are also important because they keep you from writing proposals that don't get funded. To tell you the truth, there's nothing quite as unhappy as spending a couple of months of your life writing a proposal that doesn't get funded. Now, you can't win them all, but it certainly makes life better if you win more than you lose. And the third thing about excellent proposals, which isn't as fully understood and appreciated, is that if you write a clear, well thought through proposal, then that proposal is the basis of the understanding about what it is you're going to do between the funder and the applicant. All too often, the funding proposal is too vague, and misunderstandings develop between the applicant and the funder about what is actually going to happen during the course of the project. So what are the purpose of writing proposals? Well, as I've already mentioned, the agency, the foundation, the other organization has money, and you're trying to get some of it to implement some things that you think would be worthwhile to do. And the proposal is basically the major mechanism by which you're trying to convince the funder that you and your organization understand the issues in the funding opportunity announcement or RFP or request for proposal or some other announcement that funds are available, trying to convince them that you do in fact know what you're doing and that you have a detailed plan for doing it, that working for the organization on the project are the staff and the partners that are capable of doing the work, and finally, that you can in fact do the work within the time frame and the proposed budget, that it's not a wildly optimistic or wildly cautious approach, and so the funder can get their money's worth in a timely fashion. So what I'd like to talk about today is laid out on this slide. I'd like to start by talking about some of the things when you're first starting out and starting to respond to the FOA, then get into the meat of the proposal in terms of the major components, such as the technical approach, then provide some tips that I've developed over the years in terms of reviewing the proposal and doing the final submission, and then finally I'll summarize with the main takeaways. So all of this starts at the latest when you get an email announcing that a funding opportunity announcement is available. Ideally, if you know it's coming, you've already been planning far in advance. But at the very least, things get triggered when the FOA arrives in your email or when you find out about it. So the first step is to read the funding opportunity, and then to assess whether there is in fact a fit between that funding opportunity and the organization that you work for in terms of the mission, the capacity, and the goals. Not every funding opportunity will be a fit for your organization. But it's important that you make that assessment and make it early. If you decide that this is something that you want to go for, then the funding opportunity is going to be your new best friend over the next 60 days or whatever the proposal period is. And you need to know that FOA inside out. You need to read it, reread it, understand it, reread it, and reread it. So it really lays out everything that you need to address and really frames the kind of work that you need to be writing about. So one of the first steps is to establish a realistic time schedule for the proposal, including time for administrative reviews and submission problems. Chances are that you are not the decider on the proposal, and somebody else other than you needs to approve it, and that takes time. And as we'll talk about later, submission is not necessarily easy, and there can be problems, and you need to allow time for that in the schedule. It's also important that you find out as much as you can about the funding opportunity. The Administration for Community Living typically has a teleconference about the funding opportunities they release, in which they talk about what the funding opportunity is about and what they're trying to accomplish with it, and potential applicants have an opportunity to ask questions. It's also important that you start at the beginning to make sure that your Dun & Bradstreet Data Universal Numbering System number is set. If you don't have one, you need to get one. Basically, the DUNS number is a universal numbering system for organizations that allows ACL to track organizations that are applying. You also need to update your information for the system for ward management. That has to be done annually, and at least within the Administration for Community Living FOAs, there will be detailed information excuse me, about how to get those numbers and how to apply for that information. It's important that those things be done because typically if you don't have them, you can't apply. You can't do the submission. So save yourself a lot of last-minute headache by taking care of that early in the proposal. So also early in the process, you need to figure out, at least in broad terms, what it is you're going to do. Because these funding opportunity announcements typically are fairly broad and give you an opportunity to design what it is that you want to do at your location with your organization. So you need to figure that out so you can shop that both within your organization, but also to talk with with potential partners and stakeholders in your area. So it's also important to develop an outline very early in the process with writing assignments and page length for each section. There's no point in having a 40-page technical approach if the entire proposal is limited to 40 pages. So you need to allocate both the writing assignments to individuals who can then be kept accountable to write those sections, but it's also important to establish the page length. And finally, there needs to be somebody who is driving the train, someone who has overall responsibility for the proposal, a proposal leader. That doesn't mean that that proposal leader is writing the whole proposal, but it's someone who can decide things, check to make things are moving along, and to have overall responsibility for the proposal and making sure that everything fits together properly. So something that's very important is that ACL FOAs typically have screen-out criteria. These are requirements that must be met. And if they're not met, not only won't your proposal be funded, but it won't even be reviewed. And so it's important that you pay attention to those and meet them. So these include application responsiveness criteria, such as that the project can't be passed through to another agency, application screening criteria, typically font size, number of pages, submission date. Again, the government is very unforgiving in terms of submission dates. You either meet the date or you can throw your proposal into the trash can. And also the FOA will typically include requirements that must be met, such as that you have to address 3 of the 4 subject areas that are outlined in the FOA. So the other thing you need to pay attention with early on is the scoring criteria. Again, as I mentioned earlier, what you're trying to do is write a proposal that convinces the reviewers that you are worthy, you and your organization are worthy of getting the money. And this doesn't happen in a haphazard fashion. The reviewers who are reading your proposal are scoring the proposal numerically. And typically, although not always, they're scored on a 100-point scale that are assigned across a number of criteria. Typically, the criteria include project relevance and current need, the approach, budget, project impact, and organizational capacity. And it's important that you address all of those issues and that you do well in each of the sections. If you kind of knock it out of the park in terms of approach, but you write poorly on project impact and organizational capacity, chances are that your project is not going to be funded. So the proposals need to be written to meet the criteria. You should know what the criteria are, and you should know how many points that each of the criteria are going to get. So as I mentioned, many of the ACL projects require partners, such as area agencies on aging, state units on aging, sometimes the Medicaid agency. And so it's important that when putting the proposal together, that you be strategic and identify the partners that meet your needs in terms of geography, program staffing, capacity needs, expertise. You may be an expert in your organization, may be an expert in some areas, but not all, and so it's important that these partners, if at all possible, be complementary. And it's important to engage these partners early on, especially if it's going to require that they receive funding. They will have to go through their own approval processes in order to decide whether or not to participate, and they will have to go through their own processes in terms of getting the budget together, which you will then have to integrate into the overall proposal. Something that can either be a plus or a minus is that you need to determine if the partners can participate in the proposal writing process. It can be a help in that if one of the partners has particular expertise that you don't have, that can be a huge help if they write that portion of the proposal. And it further lessens the load on any one person. But it can be dicey, because if the time comes and they don't deliver, or they don't deliver a quality product, then you're up the creek, and you'll have to scramble to rewrite or write anew what they didn't do. So it can be a plus, but it's unless you know the organization and the people well, it can be a high-risk endeavor. And finally, just because you write in the proposal that an organization is going to participate doesn't mean anything if you don't have the letters of commitment. So it's important that you get those letters of commitment signed by responsible people in the other organization, and it generally is on letterhead. So the heart of the proposal is the technical approach. And the technical approach, it's important that you link the major activities in your proposal to what are the priorities in the funding announcement. Typically, organizations like ACL and foundations and other groups that are dispensing money are trying to accomplish certain things. They're trying to get certain things done. And so it's important that you indicate in your proposal that you understand what they're trying to get done and, and craft your proposal around those priorities and those activities that they want done. It's also important for ACL demonstration projects that you describe how the proposed activities are new or are substantially modify your existing efforts. In general, foundations and other organizations are less interested in just funding what you're already doing. They want you to fund new things. They want to fund new activities. They want to break new ground. And that's especially important for ACL demonstration projects. It's also important in the technical approach that you think early and hard about how the activities of the project will continue after the grant ends. How will this project be sustained over time? And just kind of throwing up your hands and saying, well, we'll figure that out later, or the services will end, or we'll apply back to the same funder for additional funds is simply not going to cut it and is not going to be acceptable, and your proposal will be downgraded if that's your answer. So the heart of the technical approach is to explain in concrete detail what it is that the project is going to do. By far, the most common criticism of proposals is that it doesn't provide enough detail for the reviewers to be able to figure out what it is that the organization is actually going to do and whether they are capable of doing it. So, for example, in proposals to provide services to people with dementia and their caregivers, you would want to address how will people with dementia and their caregivers be recruited to participate? How will these people be identified as having dementia? How many people are you going to serve? What exactly are you going to provide these people? What services? How long? Who's going to do it? Which providers? All that needs to be spelled out in as much detail as you can manage. What are the relationships with the other service providers? Typically, these grants and cooperative agreements don't do everything that a person needs. So what kind of referral arrangements are there? And what exactly are the partners going to do? And so words like coordinate or integrate or liaison, that simply doesn't tell you anything. So again, what's important in the technical approach is that you explain what you're going to do in as much detail as you can, taking into account the fact that you've only got typically 30 to 60 days, depending on your funding source, in pulling the proposal together. So evaluation. So most ACL demonstration grants require some kind of evaluation. But it's important to understand that while there are plenty of organizations out there that fund research, ACL is not one of them. These demonstration grants are not research grants. But ACL does want some assessment of what has been the impact of the project. And in order to do that, you need to think through what are the outcomes of the project. And it's important to distinguish between outputs and outcomes. Outputs are things like the number of people served, the number of counseling visits that are provided, but those are not outcomes. Outcomes are things like caregiver burden, level of depression. So you have to talk about outcomes, but you also have to talk about outputs. So it's important to identify the measures of your relevant outcomes, and it's best to do that from the research literature. There's been an enormous amount of research over the last 50 years, especially about caregivers for people with dementia. And so don't try to invent it from scratch. There are plenty of measures that have been validated out there, are reliable, and use those. Don't make it up if you can avoid it. One of the things the Resource Center is doing is putting together a listing of some of the major measures for outcomes. That should be ready relatively soon. And I think that will be an enormous resource for people who are making applications for those kinds of projects. It's also important that you find someone who can conduct the evaluation, preferably somebody with research skills. So once you've got the person who's going to do the evaluation and you've got the outcome measures, then you need to think about the evaluation design. So what is evaluation about? Well, it's whether or not the project, the intervention, has had an impact. So how do you tell if something has had an impact? Well, you make a comparison. And so for ACL projects, a pre-post comparison is the simplest and is adequate. So basically, you're measuring your outcomes as people enter the project, the intervention, and post, you're measuring it after people have completed the services. And then you're comparing the two. So randomized controlled trials are the gold standard of research and evaluation. But again, ACL does not fund research projects, and this is not, if you propose a randomized controlled trial, then ACL is not going to fund the project. So once you've got the basic design, you've got the measures, then you have to figure out how you're going to collect the data. And so it's important that you think hard about this and that you try to come up with an approach that will collect data from as many and a large majority of the participants. Data that is integrated into program operations has a higher response rate. Surveys that are separate from everything tend to have low response rates. And if you're going to have a survey, you really need to think about how you're going to follow up with people so that they respond. If you conduct a survey of 400 people and you get 20 responses, you do not have useful data in terms of analyzing whether or not your program has had an effect. And finally, you need to describe in some detail how the data will be analyzed. So personnel and management, that's a key part of any proposal because the project will in fact fail if you don't have the right people with the right skills and the right experience implementing it. And so it's absolutely best to have people listed in the proposal who are named. That is, you know the actual name of the individual and where they're working. Avoid to-be-hired personnel in the proposal if at all possible. Now, sometimes that's not possible because you're talking about adding a substantial new set of activities to what the organization is doing. But it is problematic to reviewers because you're essentially asking them to buy a pig in a poke without knowing who it is that is actually going to do the work. So if new staff are to be hired, present as clear a statement as possible of what skills, what training, what experience, and what expertise are required so that the reviewers have a sense that you understand what's necessary in the person that is to be hired. Make sure that the lines of authority are clear, and in the proposal, describe the role of each project staff person. Say what it is they're going to do, again, in as concrete terms as you can. So in general, it's better to have fewer people on the project, each with a major time commitment to the project. That's better than having lots and lots of people, each with a smaller commitment to the project. And the reason is pretty obvious. If you have people for whom this is a big part of their job, they're going to be paying more attention to it, and they're going to be more committed to the project than if you have a lot of people who are doing a lot of different things not related to the project, and this is only a small part of what they do. In writing up the descriptions of the people on that are proposed for the project, use a consistent format so that the reviewers don't have to go hunting through the biosketch to try to find out things like the current position, the proposed role in the project, what tasks will be performed, and the relevant experience. So in terms of the budget, use the budget categories and format that are provided. Make sure that you are cognizant of and make accounting for both the cost sharing that's required, and if you're applying for Alzheimer's Disease Supportive Services Program or Alzheimer's Disease Initiative cooperative agreements, they both have cost sharing requirements, and it's important that you address them. Also, those two grants in particular also have direct service requirements, and you have to meet those as well. It's important that not only the budget people, but that the technical people look at the budget numbers, make sure that they make sense, and that they add up. In the era of Excel, having the budget add up is less of a problem than it used to be when I first started out, but formulas don't always work, and you need to take a look and eyeball it to make sure that they make sense. Timeline and work plan. So make sure that you account for all years in both the timeline and the work plan. List all the major tasks and deliverables. And again, and here I'm being the broken record, but be as detailed as possible in laying out both the timeline and the work plan. Again, this is another opportunity for you to try to convince the reviewers that you, in fact, have a plan, that you know what you're going to do, and that you've thought it through and know when it's going to happen, who's going to do it, and what it is that they're going to do. So here is part of the secret sauce for the success of organizations like RTI in terms of winning projects. And that is to have a complete draft, including the budget, completed about 2/3 of the way through the proposal time. That has two effects. First, that it helps to reduce the risk that you're scribbling out the proposal, writing it at the very last minute, and just throwing things together, because you've already got a complete draft well in advance. And even more important, it provides you with an opportunity to have the proposal read by people outside of the proposal team. The reality is that the proposal team is in the weeds. They're in the details. They typically aren't looking at the big picture. They're using lots of jargon. They're using lots of acronyms. And it's what you need is someone who has familiarity with the general topic, but is not part of the proposal team, who can read it, provide comments, give the strengths, give the weaknesses, and then you have the opportunity and the time to revise the proposal and make it much better. I can't tell you how many proposals I've looked at that started uh, pretty bad, and then the miracle of this revision takes place because they've gotten usable and useful comments from outside reviewers. So this works. Trust me, this works. And this may be one of the most important messages that I give you today. If you do that, I almost guarantee you that you'll improve the quality of your proposal by 50%. That's not to say you'll be funded, but you'll improve the quality of the proposal. And then, of course, there are a number of simple, straightforward things that everybody who writes anything needs to take into account. Use simple, straightforward language. No one's going to be impressed if you write very complicated academic language. It just makes things complicated. Don't do it. Use simple, straightforward language. Use active rather than passive tenses. Don't say that the services were provided by the AAA. Say that the AAA provided services. Avoid unverifiable claims of excellence of your organization. I can't tell you how many proposals I've read where an organization says that they provide the most outstanding services in the country or in the area, that they have that they are completely excellent. So that's just annoying, unless you've got some way of verifying that you're not just blowing smoke and that you really are the excellent organization that you say you are. Minimize the use of acronyms and jargon. Acronyms always annoy me because it makes me as a reviewer have to work harder than I would otherwise, because I need to remember and know what the acronyms stand for. Now, there are, if you work in a particular state agency, for example, there are lots of acronyms about the state-specific programs, but the reviewers aren't going to be familiar with those. Don't use acronyms unless you absolutely have to, and the same goes for jargon. Use a standard citation style. That's just elementary professionalism and shows that you know about the literature and about what has been done in your topic area. Use the spell and grammar check of Word before you submit the proposal. I'm always amazed when I read proposals and I find spelling errors. It's not hard to do, it doesn't take too long to do a spell check, but still often people don't do it. Follow the directions of the funding opportunity. Regarding font size, there are requirements on font size. Whether spacing, whether it's double or single space, number of pages, attachments, letters of commitment. The FOA says things about how they want things, and if you want to be funded, do it the way they want it in the proposal. So for the final submission, test accessing the submission system well in advance. All of these submission systems have glitches. They're often not intuitive in how they operate. Make sure that you've got what you need in order to access the submission system. And so going hand in hand with that is plan on submitting the proposal in advance of the deadline. Why? Well, if you're having trouble with the submission system, this gives you some time to work it out, to contact technical assistance on the agency side or the foundation side, to try to work through any of the technical problems that you're having. And be sure to include all of the required forms, such as the lobbying certification. If you don't submit all the required forms, your proposal may not be read, or at the very least, it may be sent back for you to send the required forms. And finally, when you get to the point where you're ready to push the button and do the final submission, before you do that, I know you're sick of the proposal at that time, but do one final read-through to make sure that there aren't glaring errors, mistakes, misspellings, sections that are missing. I've had proposals where some sections have been missing because of a glitch in the printing and the file being corrupted. Read it through before you actually submit it. So finally, the main takeaways. Again, the goal here is to write excellent proposals. If you write excellent proposals, that's not a guarantee that you're going to get funded, but excellent proposals have a better chance of being funded than mediocre or poor proposals. So the first thing is to follow the instructions of the FOA. The agency has written the FOA because they're trying to accomplish certain things. So both substantively and in the terms of the process, follow the instructions of the FOA. Make sure that the proposal meets both the screen out and the evaluation criteria. Remember that your purpose in writing the proposal is to convince the reviewers that your proposal, your project, is worthy of being funded. Plan the evaluation and the sustainability from the start. Provide as much detail as you can muster. Again, you don't have unlimited time to figure it all out, but detail, 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 that's what reviewers are looking for. Propose the staff who can do the job, preferably with a high commitment to the project. And finally, develop a draft well in advance of the due date and circulate for comments and then revise. So writing an excellent proposal is not rocket science, but it does require the consistent, disciplined application of common sense and following instructions. If you do that, then you're much more likely to have a smile on your face when you finally get an award. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that great presentation. At this time, we are going to move to our questions and answer session with Josh Wiener. So you can enter your questions into the question and answer pod. We'll switch over to a screen where you can see all the questions in front of, or well, where I can see all the questions in front of me, and you can have more room to write. So as we change over to the other screen, we can just go ahead and start with the questions that are here. The first question that came in was early on in the presentation asking, what is SAMS? If you could explain it a little more.
Well, I'll say a few words, and maybe Aaron would like to chime in as well. So it's basically a system that, so first of all, it's described in detail with links in funding opportunities that are provided by the Administration for Community Living. So it's all explained there. But basically, it's a system by which HHS tries to keep track of applicants and to gather certain information about them so that they can make sure that they know who's getting funded and where and who's responsible and that kind of thing. Erin, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't really have anything to add to it. It's literally a system award management system. So all applicants for our opportunities must register for it. It could take, as much as 2 weeks to be registered. Like Dr. Wiener said, it is there's a link. There will be a link in any funding opportunities that come out of ACL. I'm not sure if I imagine it's an HHS thing. And if you don't get that registration, you will be unable to apply for one of our grants. And if you don't have it right, so you will not be able to apply. So if you, the day before, try and register for it, if anything goes wrong, you may not be able to access the system. I mean, we've had people put a typo in their email address, and it takes 24 hours to get that straightened out. So we recommend that people ensure 2 weeks in advance and test out the system to make sure that they are registered for SAMs. But we have some at sam.gov, sam.gov. There are there's a quick guide for grant registration, and I would recommend that if you're going to apply for a grant, you go through there. Back to you.
So the only other thing to add is, in order to complete the SAMS form, you have to have a DUNS number. So you need to do that first, and that takes time as well. So that's why it's strongly recommended that you do that early in the process. Also, the SAMS needs to be updated annually. So because you did it 2 years ago, that's not good enough. You need to update it on an annual basis.
Right. Just check to make sure that if you've applied in the past that you are still up to date, because again, it will not let you access, and you'll be in a world of trouble after spending a lot of time putting together an application or a proposal.
Great, thank you. A few other questions are coming in about the SAMS and the DUNS number. Can you explain the DUNS number just one more time and how it links to the SAMS? And then hopefully all these questions will be answered.
So the DUNS number is just basically a 9-digit identification number of businesses and other organizations, and so that's what it is. So it's a way of uniquely identifying every organization, so that if there were, for example, 2 organizations with the same name, you could distinguish between them. And so that's its major purpose for this. And so, as Aaron mentioned, since SAMS is basically a grants management system, what they want to be able to do is to make sure that they're making the proper award to the proper organization.
Great, thank you. Another question came in about the scoring. I don't know if this is standard across all announcements or not, but the person would like to know if the total score point of 100 is evenly distributed among the 5 criteria, or how is it distributed?
It's outlined. No, it's not evenly distributed through the various categories, but that would be outlined in the funding opportunity announcement, exactly how many points are attributed to each category. So it's very clear in the FOA how many points are aligned with each category.
Great, thank you. Here's a question about sustainability. So the person is asking, as a reviewer, could you provide some additional insight from your experiences on the importance of articulating the sustainability plan? And for instance, what have been some good ways applicants have framed a sustainability plan?
Well, so the better ways is that the project gets integrated into ongoing operations of the organization or the agency or the Medicaid program or the services provided by through the Older Americans Act. Or so basically, you need to find a way to integrate this into regular services. That can, or you need to get outside set of funding from the organization. If the organization has unrestricted funds that it can use to support things, it's best if that has, if the organization can make that kind of commitment at least tentatively in advance, assuming that the project is successful.
Great, thank you. Another question came in about cost sharing. Can either one of you give a little more detail on cost sharing, especially as it applies to a federal cost share, and how that might be written into the budget correctly?
Erin, do you want to take that one?
So for the purposes of our programs, the cost sharing is a very specific amount that is directly aligned with the grant award amount. And there is a formula in our programs or our funding opportunity announcements. We actually have the formula that you would use is included in the funding opportunity announcement, because it's hard to explain, but when we say, for the program that I work on, ADI has a 25% cost share match, it actually is not the straight, it comes out to be, if you're doing, for instance, if you ask for $1 million, the 25% match ends up being, based on the way the calculations are put together, ends up being about $333,000. So you just have to use the formula that's provided in the funding opportunity announcement.
Great, thank you so much. Can you talk a little bit about if there's a benefit to including a logic model or a strategy and results map in your application?
So a logic model is a way to try to see if there is a plausible relationship between the activities that are to be implemented and the outcomes that you seek. So sometimes there are, and sometimes it's a kind of wildly optimistic assumption about what the activities, what kind of effect it could have. I think for some audiences, for some agencies, a logic model would be helpful. I'm not sure it would take you terribly far for ACL. I think the basic criteria is if it makes it clearer what you're doing, then that's a plus. If it's going to be complicated and require a kind of sophisticated understanding of how logic models work and the graphics associated with them, then it's probably not worth the effort.
Thanks for that. Let's see here. Another question was, if you have a pilot program, do you have any ideas about ways that you can establish you are an organization worthy of getting funded?
Well, there are part of the evaluation criteria is organizational capacity, and so you need to describe there what it is that your organization has done, and if it has a pilot project that is related to the priorities and the funding opportunity, that's certainly a plus because that demonstrates that you have some experience in that area.
Thank you. Another question came in about the difference between if there's funding going to every state, what is the value placed on having a thorough, well thought out proposal versus when you are competing for a competitive proposal? Is there a difference in how much effort should be put in if there's funding going to every state versus when you're applying for a competitive proposal?
Well, what I've been talking about is primarily applies to competitive proposals because with competitive proposals there will be some winners and probably some losers, and you want to be part of the winners. For funding that goes to every state, I think it obviously matters less in terms of writing these excellent proposals, but I'm sure ACL and project officers would appreciate all the kinds of things that we laid out, like knowing what it is that you're actually going to do, who's going to do it, when it's going to be done. And so that is certainly worthwhile doing. Aaron, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think you covered it. The basic, I mean, if a project is worth doing, it's worth doing a proposal for, and our competitive proposals are typically, I mean, I don't know, maybe for SHIP or MIPA programs, I'm not sure the states that get every amount, every state gets some money. I don't know how those work, but I know in the competitive discretionary projects, it is, it's the best proposal, so that's the best I can add.
Great, thank you. And we just have time for one more question. Can you give any tips about what should be included in a memorandum of understanding?
So a memorandum of understanding between the major organization and the partner. So I think the major things are to outline what it is that each party is going to do and to be responsible for. Is the partner going to assess individuals for dementia? Are they going to make referrals? Are they going to provide services? Are they going to provide additional information to people with dementia and their caregivers? What is it exactly that they're going to do? And if money is going to change hands, then obviously you need to clearly understand under what circumstances, how much money is at stake, and what it takes for the partner organization to receive the money. Do they need to be charging by the hour for the staff? Is it a fixed price upon doing certain deliverables? The financial arrangements are often the most important to work out in terms of a long-standing or a long-term relationship with the organization in making sure that the activities of the project get done. Because if there isn't a proper understanding there, then there'll be lots of conflict and lots of bad blood. Nothing kind of sours relationships quite as much as money.
Great, thank you. So we have run out of time. We've gotten to 4 o'clock Eastern. So at this time, we're going to close out the webinar. I do want to thank Josh Wiener again for this excellent presentation and information. And should you have additional questions, you can find email addresses for myself, Josh Wiener, and Aaron Long in the closing notes if you need to contact any of us by email. So thank you again, everyone, for